Hello there, and welcome back to the booth here in Madrid. That's Ian Duke. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe, and, well, we kind of did it, right? We got to watch Luis Scott-Vargas and Brad Nelson draft, and now we get to see them play against each other. Let's head down to the feature match area for round 10 here from Madrid. Hello and welcome to coverage of Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with R&D insider Ian Duke. We're ready for round 9 action here early in the morning on day 2, and we've got a really great matchup. We've got 2 undefeated players and big names. Luis Scott-Vargas, the Hall of Famer, the 6-time Pro Tour top 8 competitor. We got to watch him draft this morning for those of you watching live, and his competitor, Brad Nelson. We watched him draft as well, so we've got a lot of information about these decks. There's Brad also sitting at 8-0, former player of the year. And let's get underway here. Now, this matchup is going to be pretty interesting. Luis is kind of out on a limb here. He's got a crazy deck that might work really well, but also might kind of fall apart on him. On the other side of the table, Brad Nelson is playing a much more straightforward build.
Yeah, we took a look at Brad Nelson's deck list right before we began here, and it just looks like a rock-solid black-green deck. Like, not a lot of synergy, but just a bunch of powerful cards, some great uncommons, some good removal spells. Whereas Luis's deck, Marshall and I covered the draft of earlier, and yeah, it's a pretty kooky experiment. He has 3 copies of the rare Fevered Visions, which hopefully we'll see at some point throughout the match here and kind of walk through how that works.
Yeah, that's one of the really kind of cool cards. By the way, it looks like a pretty reasonable start here for Brad Nelson. Luis is on a mulligan to 5 here. You can see he's already a little short on cards. He's got a Ravenous Bloodseeker on his side. And a ton of cards in hand still for Brad Nelson. He's going to play a Fork in the Road here. He's got a Duskwatch Recruiter in his hand, one of the better uncommons in the set. Maybe the best. Card's absolutely fantastic.
It might be one of the best.
And he's going to play Fork in the Road, which is a good way to get Delirium going. It's also a good way to fix your mana. It's a little slow at 2 mana, but it ends up putting a sorcery and a land in your graveyard, which is, well, that's half of Delirium on its own, and it fixes your mana, so it can certainly pull its weight in the right list.
Mm-hmm.
Gatstaff Arsonist is the play for Luis Scott-Vargas. No attack with the Bloodseeker here as the Quilled Wolf is holding it at bay.
And we see both players splashing white here in their decks. Actually, both for Nearheath Chaplain, one of the top white uncommons. There were at least 3 in this draft.
Yeah, and they all ended up with these 2 players. Luis has got 2. And there it is, Duskwatch Recruiter. And this is a play that you'll see sometimes. The player will play it after they've got a full 5 mana out. And that way, if Luis Scott-Vargas decides to kill the Duskwatch Recruiter, then Brad can just activate it in response, probably hit a creature, and be no worse for the wear. As it stands, what's happening here is Luis looks like he's just going to pass the turn back. So Brad Nelson is going to activate his Duskwatch Recruiter. This lets him look at the top 3 cards of his library. He can put a creature card from among them into his hand. And, you know, here in Limited, where we play quite a few creatures, you know, generally we're playing 15 to 18, let's say somewhere in that range. You know, maybe in Innistrad it's a little wider of a range, but you're going to hit pretty frequently with a Duskwatch Recruiter. Though it is possible that he has not here. I actually couldn't see if he revealed anything to it there. So now this is an interesting decision here for Nelson because it's his turn. The Arsonists, why are they tapped right now?
Well, Luis attacked on his
He attacked on his
turn.
turn, dropped Brad down to 5. Okay, cool. I am all caught up.
Yep.
So the interesting sequence there for Brad was that if he wants, he can actually activate the Duskwatch Recruiter with that transform ability on the stack. Uh-oh, here's Ghostly Wings. Oh, but a Silver Strike is going to complete a 2-for-1, but not maybe the way that Brad had it drawn up, as Luis is going to discard a mountain to the Ghostly Wings. The Ghostly Wings has an activated ability that you can discard a card and return the card that it enchanting back to your hand. In this case, Luis is going to do that to save his Gatstaff Arsonist. It's also going to fizzle the Silver Strike.
Right, prevents the gain 3 life part of that.
Now, that did end up being 2 spells played, though, on Luis's turn, the Ghostly Wings, plus he followed up with an Ember Eye Wolf, which is going to transform the Duskwatch Recruiter back. Anyway, what I was saying is, when the Duskwatch Recruiter is going to transform, you can actually activate it if you're not going to do anything else before it transforms on your upkeep, and you maybe even get a card out of it. It turns out Brad wanted to keep up his mana for that Silver Strike, so he didn't. He's going to activate it now on his main phase, looking for some action. And he's found a Stoic Builder. Little combo here. He's even got a Swamp in his graveyard, which he can grow back. Stoic Builder lets you take a land from your graveyard and put it in your hand when it enters the battlefield. Otherwise, it's just a 2/3 human.
And this turn really showcasing the power of that Duskwatch Recruiter. Without that, I mean, Brad's hand was down to just 4 basic lands and a Pack Guardian. And Pack Guardian, admittedly, a powerful card, but, you know, this could have been an otherwise very even game where, you know, Brad was sort of running out of action. But as long as that Duskwatch Recruiter is on the battlefield, Brad's just going to keep going and going through his deck, finding more action. And Luis, unfortunately, looking like he's running out of gas, of course, having started on a mulligan to 5.
Yeah, interesting play there from Brad Nelson as well. You saw that he took the conservative line here of playing his Pack Guardian on his turn. That meant that he didn't open the door for Luis to counter it. He also is trying to maximize the chance that his Duskwatch Recruiter transforms, though he knows that the Gatstaff Arsonist is in Luis's hand and is very likely just to come down on his turn. Now, Brad also has the requisite 6 mana here for that Quilled Wolfian, so that's another thing that Luis is going to have to work around, as the Quilled Wolf can become a little bit scarier.
Yeah, very true. And I think it's mostly the threat that he could activate it that's relevant here. Of course, we know Brad also has that Duskwatch Recruiter to keep pumping mana into. So he actually doesn't want to activate the Quilled Wolf, but, you know, if Luis blocks in such a way that that's profitable for him to do so, he certainly will.
Interesting to see if Luis blocks with the Ravenous Bloodseeker here and kind of dares Brad to take a turn off. And that's exactly what he's going to do.
I like that line a lot because I think the most realistic way for Luis to win this game is to find a second copy of Ghostly Wings and put it on the Gatstaff Arsonist and just go to the sky for 3 turns. I
agree. And right now the Ravenous Bloodseeker is doing very little for Luis as he doesn't have the resources to discard to it. Veteran Cathar here for Brad Nelson, and you see that plane sitting down there. And Luis has seen enough. Tough one from the get-go for Luis Scott-Vargas there as he mulligans to 5. Never really gets anything going, and Brad sort of systematically, when approached that game, got some card advantage, got some great creatures, and picks up the win. We will be back right after this.
Unravel the madness. Shadows over Innistrad is now available on Magic Online. Explore the new set by signing up for Magic Online at mtgo.com. Whether riding the bus or waiting for the Pro Tour Finals to begin, Magic Duels is a great way to hone your skills and try new strategies. Featuring hundreds of earnable cards from Magic's latest sets and virtually unlimited AI and online opponents, start playing Magic Duels free today on iPhone, iPad, Xbox One, and Steam.
And welcome back to round 9 here from Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. This is the first of our booster draft. Let's head over to Seth Manfield versus Dan Lanthier. On our side table, take a look at, wow, that is a lot of spirit tokens on the side for Dan here. So what are you seeing here from a big picture perspective, Ian, about how this game could play out?
Well, it looks like Dan's on sort of the blue-white spirits deck, blue-white flyers deck, if you will. A couple of Vessels of Ephemera in his graveyard there. That, of course, being the cause of all those 1/1 flying spirit tokens in the battlefield. On the other side, Seth looks to be primarily a blue-black deck, maybe with a splash of green. A little bit hard to tell. Just kind of tuning in here. Maybe it's base blue-green with some black. But in any case, he's sort of looks to be a slower controlling deck that's more about gumming up the ground. He's got a lot of ground creatures there and a Watcher in the Web to hold off those flying tokens. So
he's also got a Sage of Ancient Lore there. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah. I see.
That thing gets scary very, very quickly.
Yeah, it sure can.
Sage of Ancient Lore it has power and toughness equal to the number of cards in Seth's hand. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, which is kind of cool too. But if it gets transformed is when it gets really nasty. It becomes Werewolf of Ancient Hunger. And that has Vigilance and Trample, which it doesn't have on the other side. And also, it counts the number of cards in your opponent's hand, too. So you have to add up all of them, and the thing can be, you know, a 7/7 Vigilance Trample or whatever pretty easily.
So the big obstacle for this game right now, from Dan Lanthe's perspective, is that Watcher in the web. If he has a way to get past that, then those spirits are just going to start sailing in for damage.
Okay, it looks like Table A, we call it our main table, we call it Table A behind the scenes. They're ready to go. Let's jump back up there. I got to see how this Luis Scott-Vargas versus Brad Nelson match ends. Brad Nelson really convincingly winning game 1 there, and we'll see if it's a little more fair of a fight here in game 2. Mountain is the play from Luis Scott-Vargas as he passes the turn back to Brad, who has a Sinister Concoction to start things off for him. Luis has no play on turn 2, but I did see a very special and very specific card for Luis's deck in his library, in his hand here, Ian. He's got a Fever Visions.
Yeah, so let's stop and talk about that card for just a moment here. We'll see if we can bring it up here on the right for you. Fever Visions, this is a rare card. Luis has 3 copies of this. He got 2 of them in pack 1. And this is kind of a kooky card. It's not the type of card that you normally think of as being a powerhouse in Limited. It's sort of a classic Howling Mind type effect. We often call these off the classic card there.
Where both players get to draw an extra card.
But there's a couple twists on this one that make it really special. The first is that the draw happens at the end of the turn, which means that you play this and then you draw the card first at the end of your turn. And on your opponent's following turn, they don't draw until the end of their own turn. So they don't have that extra card going into their main phase. So it actually sort of shifts the bounce where you're getting to benefit from that extra card first. Now, the second thing going on with this is if your opponent is stuck with 4 or more cards in their hand, if they can't empty their hand fast enough, they're going to be taking 2 damage every turn.
And by the way, we just saw a nod to that. I don't know if you caught this, Ian, but turn 2, Fork in the Road from Brad Nelson, the perfect follow-up Stoic Builder. He declines to get the forest in his hand.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so value already, right?
Indeed.
But yeah, so Luis's deck really trying to take advantage of having multiple copies of Fevered Visions and maybe even chaining one into the next, and taking advantage of that. So that's an uninvited Geist there on the battlefield for Luis.
That's a nice little threat for him, though I have to say that Brad Nelson's doing a good job, Ghoulcaller's Accomplice and the Duskwatch Recruiter, of emptying out his hand. And this is what Luis doesn't want to see. He wants to generate a lot of extra damage off of the Fevered Visions, and then just get kind of punchy, right? Get it, you know, Ghostly Wings, hit you for 4,
yep,
something like that, and just put Brad in a position where he can't recover. We have seen, of course, that Luis has 3 copies of Fevered Visions in this deck, and yes, that is a rare. He's going to play a Daring Sleuth here, end his turn, draw his extra card, and he sees another copy of Fevered Visions.
Okay, could have something starting to happen here. And, you know, the thing is, these Fevered Visions, they're not just there. It's not like Luis needs the Fevered Visions itself to do all 20 points of damage to Brad.
No.
His deck also has some aggressive creatures, and he has some combinations in there too, like Ghostly Wings. He has 2 copies of that. We saw it in game 1 to suddenly send a creature to the air, and if you combine that with something like an Uncaged Fury, you can all of a sudden, bam, hit for, you know, 10 or 12 points in the air, and that combined with a little bit of chip damage here and there from the Fevered Visions can lead to a win.
Yeah, and this is what that card forces your opponent to do. They want to take the aggressive route. And even though Brad Nelson's deck doesn't. He wants to sit back on Duskwatch Recruiter and Stoic Builder and build up a bunch of cards and do basically what he did in game 1. But here, he just traded off a Duskwatch Recruiter for a Daring Sleuth.
Yeah.
Right? Because he feels like
awesome.
he's forced to keep the pressure on Luis and punish him for playing the Fevered Visions.
A Thornhide Wolves coming down there for Brad Nelson. Just a big, beefy creature there.
Okay, so Brad, I believe, is going to fall down to 14 here and even things up, but his board state is much more impressive than Luis's.
Looks like Luis picks up a copy of Compelling Deterrence, which is super important here because the way that these Fevered Visions games play out is that both players have plenty of cards, but they're constrained on how much mana they have. So a card like Compelling Deterrence can send a creature back and really put your opponent behind on tempo, behind on mana.
Yeah, speaking of being constrained on mana, Luis only has one blue mana source here. If he had another island, it would be a really nice play to play the other Fevered Visions and then to keep up Compelling Deterrence to knock the wolves back to hand or something like that. And he just can't. He has to decide to play which blue cards he wants to play per turn and what else he can do. You see he has an Uncaged Fury in his hand as well. Again, this deck is capable of just getting a big hit in sometimes. And he is going to take this opening here and get in a big hit of damage.
Yeah, so that's 6 damage from the Uninvited Geist, +1/+1 and double strike. And then now it turns into an Unimpeded Trespasser, which is a 3/3 creature that can't be blocked. So, yeah, this is putting Luis in actually a pretty fighting position.
Very good. And it's also making life very difficult for Brad as far as getting his hand size down below 4, as it puts another card back in his hand. He draws his card for the turn. And then remember, it's going to trigger, the Fevered Visions is going to trigger on his end step. And it's pretty likely that he takes another couple of damage here.
Yep. And Brad's also a little bit constrained on mana as well. He does have a second swamp in his hand, but, if he wants to stop and answer that Unimpeded Trespasser, that's at the expense of maybe replaying some big creatures or putting some more pressure on Luis. So
also,
this game's going to be tight.
Yeah, and speaking of tight games here, the Sinister concoction that he may want to use here actually puts him from 7 to 6, which is pretty relevant when you're taking damage in chunks of 2 from a Fevered Visions.
Yeah, that is true. On the flip side, though, it does allow him to discard a card, which isn't the difference this turn between taking damage and not taking damage from the Fever Visions, but it's close. It could be.
Great point. And here we go. Sinister Concoction is going to take down the Unimpeded Trespasser here.
And that knocks Brad to 4. And, we know Luis has an extra Fevered Visions in his hand, so if he can survive the following turn's combat, which it looks like on board he can.
He can. He would be at 2, though almost anything. Pump Spell, aim high. There's a lot of cards that would get Luis here.
Yep. We'll see if...
Has he still not found a second blue mana source yet? He's got Ghostly Wings. He's going to discard to return it to the hand. And he's going to make 2/1/1 flyers because the card he discarded was Nearheath Chaplain.
Love that play. Very, very creative, making use of his mana. Even though he's stuck on blue, he still found a way to spend all his mana that turn. And this also puts the pressure on Brad.
He's got lethal in the air. He can also just take this 4 and not worry about it.
Right.
He's really worried about Grotesque Mutation here, I think would be the card that he'd hate to see.
Yeah, and that's not a commonly played card, especially in a deck like Brad's.
They play it.
Yeah, sometimes.
Lifelink's good. Brad should fall down to 2 life here. And
so Luis finally finds his second blue, and this is...
he has a Just the Win in his hand, and I think he needs it. Yeah, I think he's going to be able to play Just the Wind. He's also got to press for answers. I think Luis is in a good position here. He can lock down the biggest threat from Brad and then play out the other Fevered Visions. Brad's at 2, actually, so maybe he needs the other Fevered Visions. No, he doesn't.
I think he's going to leave up Just the Wind because Just the Wind will also put an extra card back into Brad's hand, so it makes it extremely unlikely that he'll be able to empty his hand and go down below 4.
Right. He does have a lot of mana. But yeah, it is going to be difficult for Brad to... He's got 5 cards in his hand right now with 8 mana available.
Right.
Well, we'll see.
And remember that Fevered Visions checks after Brad draws his cards for the Fevered Visions.
So he needs to get to 2 cards?
To 2 cards, right.
And actually 1? Because of the wind? Because of Just the Wind?
Well, if he goes down to 2 cards... Yeah, he'd have to go down to 1 card, right?
Now let's find out here. Brad is going to do his absolute best to just empty his hand.
Luis says, bounce your wolves, then you'll draw a card. Yep. That'll put you at 4 cards.
And that does it. Luis Scott-Vargas pieces together a win here somehow, some way. And I do think that it's tempting to look at that game and think, oh, wow, Luis really found some weird line. No, I think that's exactly how his deck's going to win if it's going to win.
Yeah, and that wasn't even a particularly great draw for Luis. It was good in the sense that he had the Fevered Vision early, but Brad had a good draw. He was curving out, playing multiple cards a turn, and Luis was constrained on blue mana there, which is his primary color. So I think as well as that game went for Luis, I think it could go even better in this third game.
Okay, let's jump back over to the table that we checked on momentarily before, Seth Manfield versus Dan Lanthier. I can also tell you that you may have noticed John Finkel and Valentin Mackel walking away from the feature match area. That was John Finkel beating Valentin 2-0. Also, Jeremy Dizani finds himself at 6-1-1, up a game over the Hall of Famer Shota Yasuoka from Japan, also at 6-1-1. And once again here, Ian, this can be overwhelming, right? We jump in on a game, and there are so many permanents and so many things happening. It looks like this was that same game that we left before. How do you start to even decipher what's going on here?
Well, great question. I mean, just kind of looking at the two decks and zooming out for a sec. I mean, it does look like Seth's deck looks like it's more controlling. He's got bigger green creatures on the battlefield. I see an Ulvenwald Hydra there. So you can already get a sense that on the left-hand side, there's a bunch of big green creatures and sort of things coming up the ground. And on the right-hand side, we see some blue and white spirits and flyers. So you already get a sense of, I think Dan Lanthier is the aggressor in this matchup, right? He wants to fly over and get in damage with his little flying spirits. Whereas Seth, I think, wants the game to go longer and kind of top things out with these big green bombs. And it looks like we're in a position where Seth is attacking with a bunch of big green creatures, and Dan looks to be on the back foot, trying to line up the best blocks that he can get. So I would say just kind of big picture here, we're looking at Seth maybe having turned the corner and trying to start ending the game with his more controlling deck. So we are in the middle of a combat here, and Dan looks to be lining up his blocks. Dan at 13 life and under a lot of pressure from these big attackers. Probably just trying to figure out the right combination of preventing a little bit of damage to himself, but not losing too many creatures in the process. Because I think if Dan wants to win this game, it's going to involve keeping as many of those flying creatures on the battlefield as possible and starting to attack through and get some damage. However, I do believe that Watcher in the Web is still on the battlefield for Seth. I think it's underneath that row of 3 untapped creatures, sort of at the top of the screen.
Yeah.
And that, of course, being a huge problem for a deck full of 1/1 flying spirit tokens and smaller spirits.
Okay, well, it looks like our main table is ready to go. So why don't we jump back and get the Game 3 conclusion while we let the never-ending Game 1 keep going here over on our side table. And I got to see what happens here. We saw a really good draws, actually, from Brad in both games. I think, his deck looks very solid to me. Right in the middle, kind of your standard limited deck with a good mix of creatures, removal spells, and a curve. Luis's deck does not resemble any of those things, but does have ways to win the game.
Yeah.
Sinister Concoction into Ghoulcaller's Accomplice here for Nelson. And there's a Daring Sleuth for Luis Scott-Vargas, which could chip in for some damage. Nope, it's not going to. Luis is immediately going to trade here for the Accomplice. And it's going to be a Gloom Widow as a follow-up for Brad Nelson. That's interesting. For Brad, he knows that he needs to put the pedal to the metal, as we say, and try to get in there. He's got 2 Gloom Widows in his main deck here, and those do hit very hard.
So unfortunate turn here for Luis. This is his turn 3, and he has failed to draw a 3rd land.
Okay.
So thinking about what best to do.
Yeah, that is going to make things difficult. It also explains that block. It looks like Press for Answers is the answer here, as he gets a clue token that he can crack to try to hit that land in case he misses next turn, and also keeps his life total high. Seth Manfield did win that game against Dan Lanthier, taking Game 1 there.
Luis fails to draw a land again. Probably we'll see him crack the clue here, hoping to hit a land. The downside being if he does not, that will put him up to 8 cards in hand and he'll have to discard. But
he's going to play Insolent Neonate.
Okay.
And just pass the turn back here. He can chump block with the Neonate and then draw a card using its Rummage ability anyway.
Oh, see, he may have a Just the Wind in his hand?
He does.
He does. Okay, so that makes that play make a lot more sense.
Sure. Draw. Yep.
Gets to draw a card off of this, too.
Yeah, and that really showcases the power of Just the Wind.
Yes.
When you can play a bounce spell like that and not be down a card, just a huge tempo swing.
He did miss his land again. He found a Tormenting Voice.
Not like this, Luis. We wanted to see greater things out of this deck.
Indeed. But in the meantime, Brad Nelson will not be stopped. He just keeps adding to the board, this time a Stoic Builder. And Luis really having a tough time. He's going to play the Tormenting Voice. I'm assuming one of those Near Heath Pilgrim. Oh, he's actually got one of his white mana sources on board. Those may be the way to come back. So it's not quite so clear cut.
Yeah, I mean, he can discard one here, and then next turn, assuming he hits a land, he can flash it back, so to speak, making spirit tokens out of the graveyard.
Yeah, but he's actually going to keep them both in his hand. I think he figures he needs to hit a bunch of lands, and he needs to start playing Nearheath Pilgrims and trading and bolstering his life total up, because he knows he's going to take at least 5 damage here.
Yeah, that's true. And Nearheath Pilgrim is a 3/1 lifelink, so it can threaten to trade with either of Brad's 2 creatures that he had.
And even the threat that he knew about after having bounced it, the Intrepid Provisioner there. So, oh, he finds a 4th land.
Unfortunately.
It's a Stone Quarry. It enters the battlefield tapped. Pretty brutal here for Scott-Vargas. Brad Nelson knows his role here, though. He just needs to keep applying pressure and try to get this game finished before Luis gets his legs under him as far as mana goes. And Luis, actually, though, with the Bloodmad Vampire now threatens to trade that off. I wouldn't be surprised if Brad just used the Sinister Concoction here to just force through 8 damage.
Yeah, I imagine he probably will.
If he does, and he just did, that's where things get really interesting, because playing back-to-back Nearheath Chaplains might actually be good enough if Brad has nothing going.
That is true.
Unfortunately, Brad has a lot going for Luis. He's got Pack Guardian and Throttle. And this rock-solid deck from Brad Nelson looks like it's going to be able to finish off a shaky draw, admittedly, from Luis Scott-Vargas. But, you know, Luis is hitting this draft from a pretty strange angle.
He is.
You know, where Brad is saying, I'm going to take the middle road here and just play a bunch of solid creatures and spells. And I think it's going to get the job done for Brad this round. These players are both sitting at 8-0. They don't have to put up spectacular records to make the top 8 here, but you know they're going to want to escape the draft with at least a match win. You know, a 2-1 out of the draft I think would be pretty fantastic.
Oh, certainly.
You know, really relieving a lot of the pressure for the standard round. I know both of these players really like their standard decks. We're going to be getting to that later on in the day. All right, here's a Lightning Axe. So Luis is not going to play the the Chaplain. Instead, he's going to discard it and then get it back. But here's Pack Guardian, no land, a Throttle, and that's game. So Brad Nelson defeats Luis Scott-Vargas 2-1 with his primarily black-green deck. And man, he is looking very good in the early stages. I think he's drafted a really solid deck here in this draft. I would not be surprised to see him run this up and get another win or two and put himself in a spot where, going back to that standard deck that he loves, run it up, and maybe we'll see Brad Nelson in the top 8.
Yeah, I agree. His deck looks great. I mean, just a classic rock-solid deck.
All right, so this is game 2. On our back table, you see Jeremy Dazani from France versus Shota Yasuoka from Japan. And, yeah, as we come in here, Jeremy Dazani's the one who's up a game. Dazani has a really interesting take on this limited format, Ian. And I think most limited formats, I had a quick chat with him. You may get a chance to see that today. But he doesn't like green, so he doesn't draft it.
That's interesting. I've heard, I think, talking to players, there's a lot of varied opinions on what's good and what's not in this format. But most commonly cited best color that I've heard is green.
Me too.
Yeah, so really interesting.
I found that very surprising, but also just the approach is interesting. He just basically ignores the green cards. And so when he's practicing and when he's drafting, it narrows things down to just 4 cards, and he can kind of focus on that. Find a very interesting approach.
Yeah, there is a school of thought that's like, learn to draft a few different decks, but draft them really well. Just get great versions of them. And, you know, if you do that for 3 or 4 different archetypes, maybe that gives you enough flexibility to navigate the draft enough that you can find something that's right for your seat.
Exactly. All right, so Morcrit Necropod there. Kind of a weird one, but a nice finisher. Big stats, 7/7 Menace for 6 mana. You know you're going to get a downside on that when you read it, and you do. Whenever it attacks or blocks, you have to sacrifice another creature or land. But it's huge.
Yeah, and curiously enough, there are times when that's not downside, right? Sacrificing a land can get you to Delirium late in the game.
Totally. Is that a Seasons Pass for Shota Yasuoka?
Can't quite see it. Yeah, it looks like it is. Wow, that's great.
So he's getting a land, a 1-mana spell, A Rancid Rat, so a 2-mana spell. Oh, unfortunately for him, though, the other 2 cards in his yard are actually 2 mana as well.
So not the greatest value here.
Just a 3-for-1.
Yeah. But that's still good. I mean, there are plenty of limited formats where 6 mana draw 3 cards is, you know, something I'll play sometimes. And Seasons Past has a lot more upside beyond that. Plus, it goes on the bottom of his library. I've seen games play out in this format where that clause that says Season Pass goes on the bottom of your library can just prevent you from ever decking yourself, right? You just get down to like the end of your library and you just start looping this, getting tons of value.
Ever After does
pretty
that
real
as well.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, we actually saw your brother Reed do that at the Grand Prix in Barcelona last week.
Oh, no
He
kidding.
was playing in a pretty epic game against William Huey Jensen, and it looked like Reed was really up against it, but then he just started playing Ever After and getting his creatures back and not getting decked. So I think the players might be waiting on a ruling. Maybe Dazani's asking if he's allowed to get a land with Seasons Past, which he is. Costs 0. 0 converted mana cost, so you're allowed to take that. But it's always good to double check with the judge if you're at a tournament and you're not quite sure. And that's what happens here. So Shota Yasuoka passes the turn back to Dazani. Dazani's got a Rancid Rats, an Olivia's Bloodsworn, and a Vampire Noble. No great attacks on the ground. But he's got Devil's Playground here as well, so he's going to get 4 Devils. These are going to be 1/1 tokens. And when they die, you can do a damage to a creature or player. They can really help finish out a game, and they're excellent little blockers too. Those Devils have a lot of value. There's 2 different cards in the set that makes them. And this is the rare version that makes 4 of them.
Wow.
It's a lot of damage.
Yeah, that's a super big deal, right? Because Shota has that...
the Morcrit Necropod?
the Morcrit Necropod, and that has Menace. So I think what he was hoping to do is maybe, you know, get Dazani lower on creatures to the point where he can't block that or has to, you know, put 2 creatures in front of that, and then the Moldgraph Scavenger gets through. But those Devils are really going to cause some problems.
I'm assuming that Yasuoka has Delirium, especially after sacrificing that land, though there's a chance he doesn't. He does not, actually. He's only got 2 different types. So this is kind of a crazy attack. He's attacking with the Moldgraph Scavenger, which is a 0/4, and really kind of putting the fear in Dazani here.
So we see Grotesque Mutation and Confront the Unknown in Yasuoka's hand. So a couple combat tricks here. Also Jace's Scrutiny. So 3 instants that could go to his graveyard at any time.
So he doesn't have the ability. He's basically hoping that Dazani just doesn't block the Moldgraph Scavenger. He's going to have to double block the Necropod. That is not a legal block currently, but he's still working it through.
So we could see something here like Jace's Scrutiny on the Rats, reducing its power, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to get over a little tiny Death Toucher. Yeah, so this has Menace, and Shota Yasuoka is going to point that out to Dazani, that he can't single block the Morcrit Necropod. He is going to have to put another creature on it.
And I also wouldn't mind seeing Shota cash in that Grotesque Mutation, right? Because that would be 10 points of lifelink.
Dazani, of course, knows the cards in Shota Yasuoka's hand from the Seasons Past as well. Okay, there's the pass, and we're going to see Jace's Scrutiny here on the Rats. That's going to reduce its power to, well, in this case, -3. Generate a clue here for Yasuoka. May just crack the clue. Here's the Grotesque Mutation. He's got to confront the unknown that he's deciding if he wants to use, and he does. Thanks to the additional clue, it's actually going to give +2/+2 as well here. So Shota just empties out his hand. But the really important play here is that Shota gets to keep his Morkrit Necropod and really keep the heat on Jeremy Dizani going forward.
Right, and that's going to chew through 2 creatures each turn, especially now that that Rancid Rats is gone, which was threatening its Death Touch.
Yasuoka up to 13 life. It seems unlikely that Dizani's going to find a way to get in for 13, though there are 2-card combos in this format that can do it. Malevolent Whispers, Steal Your Necropod is pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, Dizani does have 6 points worth of combat tricks in his hand between the Spiteful Motives and the Grotesque Mutation.
Ah, okay. And he's actually going to just fire it all off here on the Vampire Noble. So that's what, a 9? He's going to gain 9 here? Looks like he's going to gain 8.
8, yeah, that's an Olivia's Bloodsworn, right?
Thank
so
you.
2 power.
Thought it was a Noble, sorry. Yeah. So that's going to put him up to 11 and Shota Yasuoka down to 5. And 5's a pretty nice number when you're sitting there with a 5-power flyer.
Yeah, very true.
All of a sudden, he has put Shota Yasuoka way up against the wall. That was a huge swing for Dizani.
And don't forget, there's also those 2 devils there. So if Shota ever wants to get through those, that's an additional 2 points of damage.
Yeah, great point.
But right now, Shota has to answer that Olivia's Bloodsworn, or else this is going to be game.
Man, it was looking good for Shota when he passed the turn, but that swing from Dizani was huge.
Oh, looks like Yasuoka did pick up a copy of Rabid Bite.
Off of that clue.
Yep. So the tricky thing here is Yasuoka wants to attack. He wants to start, clearing a path through those devils. But if he does, and Dizani does double block with the 2 devils, that means the post-combat Rabid Bite with the Necropod would mean the Necropod trades off.
Yeah, he just has to kill the flyer here, and he does. He's going to do it pre-combat.
So the Necropod has 5 damage on it, right?
It does have 5 damage on it. Oh, sorry.
It's a
bite.
one-sided fight, right?
We call it a punch.
A punch?
Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys call it in R&D?
Just one-sided fight.
One-sided fight? Come
Yeah,
on. Really?
sorry.
That's it?
We have some clever things, but that's not one of them.
I like punch.
Yeah.
So this is actually looking really good for Shota Yasuoka again, because now he's at 5. He could be at 3 by the end of this turn, but Dizani's going to have to come up with some way to get hasty damage in.
Yes.
Dizani's deep in the tank here. This also is not quite a lethal attack from Yasuoka, right? He's attacking for 10. Let's see, land, sorcery, instant creature, yes, so it's 10 damage.
So taking a look at Dizani's deck list, one of the cards that could really turn things around for him would be Malevolent Whispers, but he does not have access to that. But maybe he does have a copy of Ember Eye Wolf in his deck. That's something that could come off the top with haste for exactly 5.
There's a prized amalgam here for Shota Yasuoka, and he is once again going to attack with both creatures. Dizani's fallen down to 1 life here. Must block everything. Do 2 to you. So Shota's down to 3.
Dizani
This
was
has to be a
swamping
huge
hand,
draw, and he
draws
finds
Mountain.
nothing. So this is going to be a game 3. Wow, that was an intense ending to that game. Very, very close.
Yeah, it was. Very, very close.
Any one little step on either direction, and it could have gone the other way. But Shota Yasuoka does, in fact, win the game. And that means that we're going to get to see a game 3 there. Looks like Seth Manfield won the match. As I don't see those players over there anymore. Yeah, he won 2-0 over Dan Lanthier. All right, so we've got a minute here while our players shuffle up. Let's take a look at what's happening not in the feature match area. This is our main play area for all the players that aren't currently in, and you can take a look at some of the matches that are still going. If we came to the shot at the very beginning of the round, every one of those tables would be filled with players playing. But as we've wound down a bit here, you can see some of them are going. Maybe some of your favorite players are standing out. You can see there's Pat Cox down there. You can see Li Shitian.
And a beautiful venue here this time, Marshall. I've really been enjoying it.
Yeah, fantastic place. You can look at the triangles on the doors out there. You can see it's actually quite a nice day today. Rained a little yesterday, but not bad. It's kind of soft, nice, We're used to it too, you and I, coming from the great Pacific Northwest region of the U.S. Back to the feature match, though. Sideboarding commencing here, and we're going to get a game 3, and I actually can't wait to see this. Both players, again, are 6-1-1 currently with their records, and this is a big deal. The players know what they have for the standard portion. They're going to have a decent idea of what they can expect to get out of their standard deck in day 2, or at least a rough expectation. But in booster draft, you do not know sitting down what you're going to end up with and how it's going to go. It's a big question mark for a lot of these players, and getting off to a match win early is a big deal.
Okay. Yeah.
Looks like a mulligan here for Shota.
So taking a look at these two decks, I mean, we saw a little bit of them last game, but Shota's deck is primarily black and green with a little splash of blue. Looks like for a Jace's Scrutiny and a Prized Amalgam.
He's splashing for Jace's Scrutiny?
Well, he's not splashing necessarily for it, but given that he is splashing, he is playing it. I don't think I see any other blue cards, so it's a little bit surprising.
So he's splashing for Jace's Scrutiny?
Well, Prized Amalgam also.
Okay. But he's splashing for...
Yes, Marshall,
Okay.
he's splashing.
I mean, if it's one of the two cards, I'm calling it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if there's
How
any
high
synergies.
has that card gone up the list, right? I remember looking at it at the beginning, and those type of cards are generally pretty overlookable. But for whatever reason in this set, probably because it gives you a clue, but it's been really good.
Well, that's one of the coolest things about drafting this set to me is that a lot of these cards that are normally like meh combat tricks or kind of weird situational effects, they all come with clues now, right?
Yep.
Which makes them just a lot more playable. And I think it's a lot of fun being able to play with effects that you don't normally play with. You just normally automatically dismiss as this is an unplayable. But yeah, Jace's Scrutiny has moved up the list a lot for people. So here comes a Spiteful Motives.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because this, I think, highlights a lot of how this format plays out. And this game is going to be incredibly quick if Shota can't get his feet under him. We've got an Asylum Visitor here with Spiteful Motives applying massive pressure to Shota Yasuoka, who's trying to, I call it get cute here, right? He's playing Ulvenwald Mysteries, and he's trying to, mill some cards, get some value going, but in the meantime, he's taking massive hits of damage here from Jeremy Dezani.
Yeah, this Asylum Visitor went turn 3 attack for 3, turn 4 attack for 6, and now turn 5 is attacking for 6 again.
Huge hits, and as you can see, the Ulvenwald Mysteries on the side, it cares about your creatures dying, right? Now, what's going to happen here is Shota is going to chump block with the human soldier that was created because he played Confront the Unknown. And this is not what Shota wants to be doing. He cycled it basically just to take no damage for the turn. He has to get stable, though. Ghoulsteed's fine. Nothing wrong with it, but it does not tussle correctly here, and it's going to get killed here. Bang! Another 8 damage, and Shota's down to 3. Full punishment mode here for Jeremy Dezani, and this has to be huge here for Yasuoka, and it's not. It's a Solitary Hunter. He's going to have to chump block and go to 1.
Wow. I don't see too many ways out of this. I mean, Shota does have Ever After in his hand, so he could
No creatures yet in the yard.
Yeah. Right, because that Ghoulsteed was exiled, right?
Indeed. It absolutely was exiled, Ian, and this is not looking good here for Yasuoka. We saw a pretty intricate last few turns of the last game. This is much less intricate and much more punch you in the face from Dazani.
Yeah, and this may reveal a little bit. You talked about Dazani's color bias here. I mean, he may have just decided that instead of being a green deck that's fiddling around with Delirium and Self-Mill and all these other sort of dirtily type strategies, that he's just going to beat down, right?
Right, and look at Yasuoka's hand. It describes exactly what you just mentioned.
Right.
Right? These incremental card advantage, slow. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you here, Ian. I love drafting those type of decks, but you got to respect Dazani's approach here.
You know what you don't want to see when you're at 1?
What's that?
Devil's Playground.
Oh, no. I can't imagine anything. Yeah, that's going to do it. He plays a land and passes. And Dazani, with the just blitz there of Shota Yasuoka in Game 3, earns the match win. Whoa.
Yeah, that was blisteringly fast. Although I do have to say, Shota's deck looked pretty cool. It looked really powerful.
It looked very
past,
good.
Ever After. And now, actually, after looking through that and seeing his deck play, the Blue Splash makes a lot more sense, right? Because he has Prized Amalgam as well, and that works with Ever After. It works with Ghoulsteed, right? All those things.
Very nice, yeah. And it's also just good.
Yeah,
you know,
it's just
a fine card, too. Yeah, and I can't blame him there. But, yeah, that, I think, that match, and specifically that game, really encapsulates a lot of the struggle that we're sort of working our way through with this format, which is that, can I do these things? Can I do Seasons Past and Ever After? And can I set up Ulvenwald Mysteries to go long and get me a bunch of cards and creatures and things are moving forward? Or should I be drafting the combat tricks and the small creatures? And I'll tell you what, there are players here at the Pro Tour on either side of that camp, and I don't think it's really been settled yet.
Yeah, I don't think it's been settled at all. And I think, you know, coming into this Pro Tour, I think what a lot of teams and players focused on in their testing was how do I make the synergies work? How do I get a good version of the Delirium deck, you know, of these 3-color, you know, green-based decks? And they figured it out. But then they came in here, and now they're up against, you know, these blisteringly fast red-white decks and black-red vampires and such. So, yeah, it's definitely a war of, speed, I guess.
And we'll see who does it. All right, so it looks like we're going to be heading into round 10 next round, and that means, once again, we're moving our way through the booster draft portion here. We're going to play 3 rounds of booster draft. We've just put 1 in the books, and we've got 2 more to go today before switching over to standard for 5 rounds. And that leads us up to our top 8. I mean, today is going to be one of those days where we get to run it right through, but this booster draft is super, super important, and we're going to be bringing you every single match of it. For now, though, I'm told Richard Hagan is ready at the news desk.
Thanks very much to Marshall. They're closing out round number 9. So some results then. John Finkel, 8-1 over Valentin Mackel, you saw. Brad Nelson, 9-0. Luis Scott-Vargas, 8-1. Seth Manfield, 8-1. Dan Lanthier, 7-2. Now, Steve Rubin played against Mike Majors. That was a good one. Rubin wins that one, 8-1. Max Molish in Battle of the Relative Unknowns. Max Molish 8-1 over Taria Kakumai 7-2. I mean, still good resume, but you know, not one of the giant superstars of the game. Then Christian Calcano, he's up to 7-2. Andrea Mengucci up to 7-2. The man with the best names in Japanese Magic, Yuya Nakamura, up to 7-2. That's Christian Seibold to 6-3. But out on the floor for us as we go deep into round 9 is Brian David Marshall. He's got a very special guest. BDM, who are you with out there?
Thanks, Rich. I'm here with 2-time Pro Tour top 8 competitor Andre Strasky. Andre, you just beat a Hall of Famer this round. How'd your draft go?
I think it went pretty well. I'm drafting red-green. I had drafted red-green werewolves, which is like one of my favorite archetypes. I'm kind of trying to force it. I had it in my first draft yesterday as well. I feel like the green cards are really strong, and overall the werewolf team is like one of the best archetypes you could be in.
How much of a change-up was it not revealing double-face cards if you want to draft the werewolf deck?
I think it makes it kind of worse because you can just like force it strongly if you just... In our house drafts, for example, before we knew about the rule, I, for example, first pick 2-1 for 2 as a second pick.
Hinterland Logger.
Yeah, the guy, and like my teammates laughed at me, but I feel like you just send a signal to your neighbors that you're in the green-red archetype, and they will like stay away from it. So I think it made it slightly worse, but the archetype is still very strong. So.
What's a key card? Someone at home thinking about drafting this and maybe Friday Night Magic, what's one of the key cards they want to look out for that they might not be aware of?
I feel like you just need a lot of werewolves, and then, for example, the 2-mana werewolf removal. Like, you deal damage equal to the power of your werewolves. I don't know what the name. So that card's pretty strong. And overall, you just want to have a good curve, bunch of werewolves, some removals, some combat tricks, nothing special.
Do you feel like drafting the deck changed a little bit with Fabrizio and Terry doing so well with all the very aggressive combat tricks? Has it been a little harder to get those cards?
I don't think so. Not necessarily. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of good combat tricks, so you can get them pretty easily.
How's your season going this year? And like, how do you feel going into, round 10 here at 7-2?
So I have 36 points, which basically means I need to go 12-4 to lock platinum, which is like the main goal for the season, obviously. So with a couple rounds to go, I feel pretty good. I think our construct deck is strong. My draft deck is pretty good, and I just beat Boritsu, who's likely the best player in our pot. So I feel pretty good with my chances.
Okay, and you're still working with team face-to-face games?
Yes, it has been a blast. Once again, we had some new members, Steve Rubin and Brian Brown-Dune, and they were like the guys who basically built the deck I'm playing. So thanks, and it was amazing. I really enjoyed it.
All right, Andre, I'll let you get ready for your next round. Things are wrapping up here on the floor. We're about 4 minutes after time. Still a couple things going on as things play out, but we're going to send it back to the news desk and Rich Hagon.
Thanks very much to Brian David Marshall. There you see them out on the floor with just a few matches remaining in round 9. Well, if you want to be a winner on Magic Online, we've collected all the data over the last few days and found the perfect picks for you. So hopefully you saw our friendly color pairs yesterday. It's time now for part 2 of the Magic Online Draft Archetypes.